Hi, guys. Welcome. Please forgive me for not talking politics today, but after yesterday's breakup, I just can't do it today. I need another day off from it, but I'm going to cover something that's near and dear to my heart. You all know that I'm a Christian, and I'd like to start off by saying I'm Protestant, I'm a Baptist. I don't believe in relics at all, and I'm not going to present a relic to you today. I've been studying this for about 6 years, maybe a little longer, and I'm convinced that it's real after looking at much evidence. And I'm going to read what I wrote. This isn't AI. I have some shots for you of what I'm talking about, some pictures, but forgive me for reading as well. But this is me, this isn't AI. So let's look at the Shroud of Turin. If one asks Google what the most scientifically studied object in human history is, the answer is quite surprising. It's the Shroud of Turin. The shroud is a fine linen cloth that measures 14 foot 6 inches long by 3 foot 9 inches wide and weighs 5.5 pounds. It's a rare 3-to-1 twill herringbone pattern weave. The length and width correspond to the ancient Assyrian cubit, measuring 8 by 2 cubits evenly. This unit of measure was used in ancient Israel, but not in medieval Europe. And if you remember, when they did the radiocarbon dating, they said the shroud had a date of 1260 to 1390. We're going to get to that. The Shroud of Turin contains an image of a badly scourged man who's been crucified. His hands and feet have been pierced, and he's wearing a cap of thorns. There are deep puncture wounds to his scalp and a 4 centimeter wide puncture wound in the man's side. The image on the cloth is the reason the Shroud of Turin is the most studied object in human history. In May of 1898, an attorney and aspiring photographer named Segundo Pia took the first photographs ever of the shroud. Later that night, he's processing them in his dark room, and when he first laid eyes on it, the finished version, he was so startled he almost dropped the glass plate. And so started the next 30 years. Segundo Pia was ridiculed publicly and accused of doctoring the image in some way. And that lasted until 1931, when Giuseppe Ernrey photographed the shroud with the exact same results. The photographs and image have led to scholarly study encompassing 102 scientific disciplines over the last 130 years. Study of the shroud is called syndenology from the Greek. All right, I'm going to show you a picture real quick of the image that was taken by Segundo Pia. Okay, this is a photograph of this. Okay, now when you look at this, you have to stand between 6 and 8 foot away, or the image completely disappears. I mean, it's just, the image is gone if you're in any different proximity than that. So let me get back to my writing here. The shading of the image is based on the proximity of the image bearing fibrils to each other, not the darkness of the fibrils themselves. Okay, the darker parts of the image have more dark fibrils closer to each other. A good example is stippling drawing, which uses one color of dots to create an image. Shading is achieved through dot density. Darker areas have more dots, and lighter shaded areas have less dots. All of the fibrils on the shroud, which comprise the image, are the exact same darkness. They have turned a sepia or yellowish color. The shroud image contains information consistent with a photo negative, an X-ray, and a hologram. Yes, you didn't hear me wrong there. Sorry, give me 1 second here. Okay. In 1976, two professors at the Air Force Weapons Lab Sandia put a photo of the shroud into a VP8 analyzer to see what it would render. Let me pull this down and put myself back up on the screen. So they put a photo of the shroud in a VP8 analyzer to see what it would render. And the VP8 creates a brightness map of whatever data it processes. White appears higher and black lower. The VP8 makes a clear distinction between what's genuine and what is not genuine. Regular photographs become distorted and completely smeared. You can't tell if it's a person or not. The VP8 was developed for the space program and was intended to map the surface of Mars and to be used for military surveillance. Professor John Jackson and Eric Jumper from Sandia Labs hold doctorates in spatial engineering and special physics. And in 76, when they saw the image rendered by the VP8 analyzer, they said, we almost fell out of our chairs. The image contained three-dimensional information, unlike any other photograph in the world. Let's take a look at that image that they looked at. I'm going to put it up full screen for you. So that's what they're looking at right there. That has 3D information encoded in it. Now I see what's going on. Each time I pull a picture up, this thing takes my writing and shoots it right to the end. So I apologize for that. So the professors took the image to the JPL and scanned it line by line, building a 3D model of the image. The image is the result of an interference pattern of light. Needless to say, this shouldn't be possible with any photograph, much less a photograph taken in 1931. This laid the seeds for what would become known as the Shroud of Turin research project. Over the next 2 years, many of our top scientific institutions, being perplexed by the image on the shroud, became involved. Here's a partial list in order that we might understand the level of expertise brought to bear on the Shroud of Turin. Los Alamos, they invented nuclear weapons, and our sister lab, Sandia, the Air Force Weapons Lab, the Air Force Academy, Brookhaven National, McCann Associates, and NASA through JPL and Pasadena. Scientists who were world-renowned in their fields came together to form the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STIRUP. Their goal was to answer one simple question: how was the image formed? The team contacted the shroud's owner, King Umberto II of Italy, and received permission for an extensive scientific examination of the shroud. STIRUP had 18 months to prepare every test imaginable, and U.S. corporations donated nearly all resources they required. For example, Kodak gave $1 million in specialized film. They also donated cameras used by our astronauts in space and on the moon. Every test was scripted before they left, approved and scheduled in advance. Not 1 hour was wasted. On October 8th of 1978, the team began its investigation at the Royal Palace adjacent to the Turin Cathedral in Turin, Italy. Most of the 33 scientists who traveled to Turin were agnostics. Although they had been raised Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish, there were only a couple of practicing believers among the entire team. Barry Schwartz, one of the team's photographers who's spoken publicly on the Shroud for decades, tells us the mood of the team when they arrived in Italy. Quote, almost everyone thought we'd be there for 15 minutes, identify some brush strokes, and get a free trip to Italy. However, some of the team had real questions they couldn't resolve, like, why does this image have 3D spatial information encoded into it? But prevailing thought was the team would quickly identify a forgery of one kind or another, or better said, the team would identify a human artist. What actually happened over the next 5 days, 24 hours a day, was the Stirrup team examined the Shroud. Every day had been scheduled for specific tests, as I said, before they left the U.S., and it was a rigorous schedule, okay? They didn't waste any time. The team prepared in every way, having constructed a steel table of proper dimensions that would move into any position to accommodate the multitude of tests to be run. The table used magnets to secure the Shroud during testing, and all tests were designed to be non-destructive. Stirrup brought 80 crates of gear, performing every test that applied, including forensics, medical analysis, mass spectrometry, X-ray radiography, infrared thermography, photomicroscopy, microchemistry, and UV spectroscopy. If a test was potentially useful, Stirrup performed it, looking at the chemical, blood, textile, and image characteristics of the Shroud. Barry Schwartz tells us that after the first hour of examination, they all knew this was one of a kind. The Shroud was an anomaly and truly unique. The image is 1/100th the thickness of a human hair and retains that depth consistency throughout in its entirety. Viewing the cloth in person, one must stand 6 feet away or so, or the image disappears, or at greater distance becomes distorted and completely undiscernible. The image is a photographic negative, which is what surprised its first photographer, Secondo Pia, so much he almost dropped the glass plate. Pia was expecting to take his photo of the Shroud and develop it, which would turn it into a positive image. But his first photo, his negative, before he'd completed the developing process, was a positive. It was clearer, much more defined, and revealed astounding detail. Wounds are visible on the wrists, hands, feet, back, legs, and especially the head, with what scientists refer to as forensic accuracy. Remember, photography wasn't discovered until 1822, which is 500 years after the demonstrable provenance of the Shroud. I'll have more to say on this a bit later. Essentially, we have a photographic negative imprinted on a non-photographic sensitive medium, the linen cloth. In the final report, Eric Jumper concluded, quote, the body image is made up of yellowed surface fibrils of linen that are in more advanced stages of dehydration than the non-image bearing fibrils of the Shroud. No evidence was found in the body image of any added substances that could have contributed to the yellow color of the fibrils from the image. The data taken together do not support the hypothesis that the image on the Shroud is due to any artist. The cellulose comprising the fibrils has undergone a dehydrating, oxidating reaction, causing them to age faster than the fibrils that do not contain the image. Stirrup concluded that the image was not a painting, not a scorch or rubbing, nor any other kind of artist's rendition of Jesus' crucifixion. Each thread of the shroud is made up of 200 fibrils, and the image is 1 to 2 fibrils deep throughout the entirety of the cloth. No substance was discovered binding the fibrils together, creating the image. The shading of the image is based on the proximity of the image-bearing fibrils to each other, not the darkness of the fibrils themselves. The darker part of the image has more fibrils closer to each other. And I'm sorry I read this before, but when I put a picture up, it looks like this thing kicks me to the end of what I cut and pasted, so I apologize for that. A good example is stippling drawing, which uses one color dots to create an image. Shading is achieved through dot density. Think about that. Darker areas have more dots, and lighter areas have less dots. All of the fibrils on the shroud, which comprise the image, are of the exact same darkness. They've turned a sepia or yellowish color. The shroud image contains information consistent with a photonegative and an X-ray and a hologram. Now, that takes us to the end of what I've written here. I want to show some different pictures. This is called a solidus. It's from 699 AD. Now remember, they said that the shroud was dated 1260 to 1390. This coin right here has 200 points of congruence with the face of the man on the shroud, with this face right here in a close shot. And I want to read to you something about that, because it's just it's incredible. All right, I apologize. In 1911, forensic pioneer Edmond Locard concluded that 12 matching points provided a statistically certain identification, points of congruence. This became the basis for the 12-point guideline. Forensic details of the scourge marks wound count. There's 200 ball-bearing shaped scourge marks on the body that they can identify. I'm sorry I didn't bring a better picture, but what the scourge they used on Jesus looks like is a little barbell, and it's like a three-tailed whip. Okay, they can even tell that 2 different size men were hitting Jesus, which is who I believe this was. Okay, and it wasn't a crown of thorns, but like somebody put together a cap of thorns and crushed it on his head with a stick, because they can count the blood marks. There's like 30 some cuts or lacerations into his scalp. Bear with me for 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to end this up here. What I wrote is just a lot longer than what I've done here, but we're already at 20 minutes. And I apologize in advance for not editing all this. I'm not really set up. I'm even using the free StreamYard today to just get used to and see if I like the tool. I hope you guys will share this out. I really believe this is authentic. And I would debate with anyone, seeing as though I've examined the evidence for so long and I've looked at it every which way from Sunday. You can't have a photographic negative on a non-photographic, surface. 500 years before photography is invented, there's 3D effects in the VP8 analyzer. It's got 3D information encoded into it. So, and one last thing I'll do is just give you a little story. When they finally decided to do the radiocarbon dating, what had been agreed on 2 years before is that they were going to take 7 separate little 1-inch snippets from all over, because that's good science. Then what happened at the last minute is 3 men, who I don't remember their names, but they were bigwigs, sat down in a room for a couple of hours and came out and said, you can have 1 7-inch strip from this corner right over here. And there's pictures of that corner under X-ray fluoroscopy or whatever it's called. And you can see that that corner is a medieval reweave. You know, they used to take it out and hold it up and show it to people who would come by. So the nuns were constantly repairing the corners. But the image is, like I said, consistent all the way through. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll have some political content for you next time. This is a labor of love for me, and I thank you all for being here. God bless.